So, I've got something really interesting lined up for you today on Disruptarian Radio. We're going to dive into a topic that's, well, pretty controversial but super important to discuss.
Hi, everyone. Really excited to be here.
I'm joined today by Adrian, who's, she's got such a fascinating background. You were actually deeply involved in feminist activism before, right?
That's right. And I've seen both sides of this movement. You know what I mean? Like, I was completely immersed in it, but now I've really stepped back and, well, I've got some pretty different perspectives on where things have gone.
What really interests me is how you've sort of made this complete transition from being an activist to becoming one of its critics.
Listen, it's been quite a journey, right? I mean, I still believe in equality, absolutely. But what I've seen, what I've experienced, the movement has just really gone in a direction that I think needs to be examined more critically.
Today we're going to get into this whole idea of how feminism might have overreached in some ways, and how society's kind of pushing back against that. I think your perspective is going to be super valuable here.
Oh, definitely. And there's so much to unpack here, like so many aspects that people don't really talk about or fully understand.
So let's start at the beginning. How did we get from, fighting for basic rights to where we are today?
Right? So the thing is, feminism really started with these incredibly important goals, right? Like women fighting for the right to vote, to work, to have their own bank accounts even. And those were absolutely necessary changes.
Makes total sense. Those seem like pretty fundamental rights we take for granted now.
Exactly. But here's what's really interesting and kind of concerning, As these basic rights were achieved, the movement started to, it started to shift. Like, instead of focusing on specific inequalities that needed addressing, it began pushing this narrative that's really quite different.
How so?
Well, you see, it evolved from fighting for equal rights to basically promoting this idea that everything wrong in society is somehow connected to men and masculinity. And this shift happened so gradually that many people didn't even notice it happening.
That's quite a transformation.
Oh, absolutely. And look, I witnessed this firsthand in activist circles. We went from discussing genuine issues like workplace discrimination to literally demonizing men for just existing, right? Like, everything became about this concept of toxic masculinity and patriarchal oppression, and, well, the movement really lost its way. Let's examine this clip of how it all started. This will help give perspective.
How do we destroy the family? By destroying the American patriarch. Well, this might shock you, because I also thought the same for a very, very long time, that the people who created feminism actually were nice people who wanted the best for everyone and just wanted equality. Okay, here's what really happened. So, Kate Millett, she was an American feminist, author, and artist. She is the founder of the National Organization for Women. Her sister, Mallory, was invited to one of the first meetings that established the National Organization for Women. So this is a feminist group that has been around since the start of the feminist movement, and they basically pioneered the whole movement. At this meeting, they gathered around a large table with Kate Millett, the chairperson, and she opened the meeting with the following back and forth recitation. So this is how the beginning of the meeting went. Why are we here today, she asked. To make revolution, they answered. What kind of revolution? The cultural revolution. How do we make cultural revolution? By destroying the American family. How do we destroy the family? By destroying the American patriarch. And how do we destroy the American patriarch? By taking away his power. And how do we do that? By destroying monogamy. And how do we destroy monogamy? By promoting promiscuity, eroticism, prostitution, and homosexuality.
Wow. Come on.
So this proceeded with a long discussion on how to advance these goals by establishing the National Organization of Women. Leader's sister says, it was clear they desired nothing less than the utter deconstruction of Western society.
What do you think sparked this change?
You know what? I think it was partly success, ironically. As we achieved more equality, certain feminist leaders needed to keep the movement relevant, right? And they did this by basically moving the goalposts. And and creating this narrative of permanent victimhood that honestly just doesn't reflect reality anymore.
Speaking of these changes, I think we really need to talk about the Me Too movement. That was quite a turning point, wasn't it?
Oh my goodness, yes. You know, the Me Too movement is actually like the perfect example of how good intentions can spiral into something really problematic. Like, it started with this completely valid goal of exposing genuine sexual misconduct, right? And that was absolutely necessary.
What do you think changed?
So what happened was the movement quickly transformed into this weapon, right? Like, suddenly an accusation alone became enough to completely destroy someone's life. And the really concerning thing is that there was absolutely no need for evidence or due process anymore.
How did this affect workplace dynamics?
The impact was just massive, right? I mean, what we're seeing now is that men are actually afraid to mentor women, to work alone with them, to even have casual conversations. And can you blame them? Like, one misinterpreted comment, one false accusation, and their entire career could be over.
That seems pretty counterproductive to equality. I want to show a clip of comedian Dave Chappelle discussing this issue on his special on Netflix called Sticks and Stones.
He didn't do anything that you can call the police for. I dare to try. Call the police on him. Hello, police? Yes, I am on the other line with comedian Louis C.K., and I think that he is masturbating while I'm on the phone. You know what the police are going to say in Atlanta? Well, what are you guys talking about? They ruined this nigga's life, and now he's coming back playing comedy clubs, and they acting like if he's able to do that, that's gonna hurt women. What the fuck is your agenda, ladies? Is sexism dead? No, in fact, the opposite happened. I said it was gonna get worse, and they said I was tone deaf. But 8 states, including your state, have passed the most stringent anti-abortion laws this nation has seen since Roe v. Wade. I told you.
Exactly. And here's the really ironic part. This movement that was supposed to help women in the workplace has actually made it harder for them to advance. Because now we're seeing what they call the Pence effect, where male executives are they're just avoiding one-on-one interactions with female colleagues altogether.
So it's created this kind of isolation?
Oh, absolutely. And it's not just in the workplace. The whole dating landscape has completely changed. Like, men are terrified of approaching women now. And when they do, there's this constant fear that any interaction could be misinterpreted. The movement basically created this atmosphere of constant suspicion and fear.
You mentioned something really interesting there about social dynamics. I've been seeing a lot of discussion lately about how certain feminist circles handle disagreement.
Oh, yes. And this is actually something that's really, really fascinating from my experience in the movement. Like, there's this whole pattern of social aggression that's become, completely normalized. And what we're seeing is this incredibly sophisticated system of social control.
How does that actually work in practice?
So, it typically starts with something like someone expressing even a slightly different opinion about gender issues. And then what happens is it's actually quite calculated. The person becomes a target of what I call social assassination. Like, first there's the gossip, right? And then it escalates to public callouts, and then it just snowballs into this full-blown campaign of reputation destruction.
That's pretty intense. I actually procured a clip by Jordan Peterson about this type of character assassination, and it is very interesting. Let's have a listen to this interview.
But violence often pops up in your work as something you think drives things. That I think you've said in relations between men are regulated by a background threat of force, and in a sense that's why men have difficulty with women. Is it really?
No,
so?
That's why men have difficulty with women who are completely out of control. But
who should control women?
Well, other women themselves, men, society, just like everyone is controlled. I mean, you're controlled by society, I'm controlled by society, and thank God for that. I mean,
funny. I mean, you described yourself as a liberal earlier, and I think a liberal doesn't think that a society controls women or men.
Well, let's say regulates. I'm a psychologist as well.
But what is an out of control woman? What is this creature? How do we know when we met one?
Well, I'm sure that you've met women in your life that acted towards you in a bullying and detestable manner. It's very difficult for women to cope with that because they don't have any real recourse. And female bullying can be unbelievably vicious. And usually that takes the shape of reputation destruction, innuendo, and gossip. It's well documented. It's very difficult to defend.
But
no, men do it too, but men no. But
sorry,
the patterns,
disproportionately women, in your view, or not? Sorry.
Yes, disproportionately women. That's what the data indicate. I mean, if
But
men
where
are
is the data on innuendo and gossip?
well, it's among antisocial behavior among adolescents. It's a well-documented field. So, because people look at aggressive and antisocial behavior in women and in men, and in women it tends to take the expression of innuendo, gossip, and reputation destruction, and in men it tends to take the form of outright physical aggression. There's a whole literature on that. It's not a surprise to anyone. This has been known for 30 years. I mean, the rates of antisocial...
I think the idea of the female gossip probably predates 30 years.
Well, it does.
By a long time, but that doesn't... doesn't make it gospel,
but
really,
people
does it?
No, it doesn't. But people have looked at how women express... Look, women have to express aggression somehow unless you're willing to say that they're not aggressive. They tend not to do it physically, not to the degree men do, so they use other channels. And what other channels are there other than physical aggression if you're going to be aggressive? Well, you go after people verbally. You go after them with innuendo and gossip and reputation destruction. And that's how it works.
And just to be clear, that you think that's predominantly a female modus operandi?
It isn't that I think that.
Well, I'm
it's that
asking
the
you.
clinical literature indicates that. It isn't that I think it.
Well, I'm not interviewing the clinical literature. I'm interviewing you. What do you think?
Well, I'm a psychologist and a scientist,
You're
and
a
I tend to base my opinions on what I've read in the broad, relevant clinical literature. I'm not making this stuff up. I studied antisocial behavior for like 15 years. I'm actually quite an expert on it. And so we know that men are more likely to look at it this way. All right. Women are much more likely to try to commit suicide. And men are much more likely to kill themselves. And the reason for that is that men use lethal force and women don't. Now that's a big difference. Okay, so then you say, well, women manifest aggression towards themselves and to others, but they don't use lethal force. They don't use physical force the same way men do. So they have to do it some other way.
Why do
what
they
are the
have
other
to
ways?
do something some other way? That you
Because
can take
people
your
are
Hobbesian
aggressive.
war against, so you're basically a Hobbesian. Life is
No, I'm
war of
half
all
and
against
half.
all.
Half and half. Half Hobbes, half Rousseau. That's why I'm not an ideologue. Because I don't think that people are good or evil. I think they're both. I don't think that culture is security or tyranny. I think it's both. And I don't think that nature is benevolence or catastrophe. I think it's both. And that's why I'm not an ideologue.
That seems pretty legit. And here's the thing that's really, really concerning. Like, social media has made this so much more powerful. Like, these attacks can now happen at this massive scale, right? And what we're seeing is that people are absolutely terrified of speaking up because they know that one wrong word, one slightly controversial opinion, and their entire life could just implode.
What about the impact on open dialogue?
Oh my goodness. It's been absolutely devastating for genuine discourse. Like, even within feminist circles, people are walking on eggshells constantly. And what's really ironic is that this behavior, it's actually reinforcing the very power dynamics that feminism was supposed to challenge, right? We've just replaced one form of oppression with another.
Sounds like it's created a kind of digital mob justice system.
Exactly. And what's really, really concerning is how effective it is. Like, this social aggression, it's actually more damaging in many ways than traditional forms of conflict because there's often no way to defend yourself. And once your reputation is destroyed online, it's practically impossible to rebuild it.
So, Adrian, let's talk about something that's really caught my attention lately. The Now movement and specifically its impact on family structures.
Oh yes, this is actually something that's really, really fascinating and quite concerning when you dig into the history. You know, a lot of people don't realize that the National Organization for Women, under Kate Millett's influence, had this incredibly radical agenda from the very beginning.
What were they actually pushing for?
So, what's really, really interesting is that, like, based on accounts from Kate's own sister Mallory, these early Now meetings were they were absolutely focused on dismantling traditional family structures. And they weren't even subtle about it. They were actively promoting things like, widespread promiscuity, and they were really pushing this idea that monogamy was somehow, like, It was this tool of oppression.
That's pretty different from what most people think now is about.
Exactly. And here's what's really, really crucial to understand. This wasn't just some fringe element of the movement. Like, these ideas became absolutely foundational to modern feminist theory. And what we've seen over the decades is this systematic attack on traditional family values, right? The movement basically went from supporting women's choices to actively stigmatizing women who chose traditional family roles.
What kind of impact has this had on society?
Oh my goodness, the impact has been it's been absolutely profound. Like, we're seeing record numbers of single-parent households, and there's this whole generation that's grown up with this really negative view of family structures. And what's really, really tragic is that the movement that was supposed to empower women has actually created this situation where many women feel guilty or ashamed for wanting a traditional family life.
You know what's really interesting about all this? The way society has started to push back against some of these extreme feminist positions.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And it's happening in so many different ways, right? Like, one of the most notable areas is actually in the workplace, where we're seeing this really, really significant shift in how companies handle these situations now.
What kind of changes are you seeing?
So what's really, really fascinating is that companies are now implementing these much more balanced policies, right? Like, they're putting in place very specific protocols for handling accusations, and they're making sure there's actual evidence before taking action. And what's really interesting is that we're seeing more protection for both sides now. You know what I mean?
That seems like a pretty big shift from where we were a few years ago.
Exactly. And there's this whole other aspect that's it's really gaining momentum. We're seeing this rise of men's rights advocacy that's actually being taken seriously now. Like, they're bringing attention to things that they were completely ignored before. Things like false accusations, custody battles, and mental health support for men.
How is this playing out in the legal system?
So there's been this really, really interesting development in the courts, right? Like, we're seeing more judges who are actually demanding solid evidence before just accepting accusations at face value. And what's particularly fascinating is how defamation laws are being used more effectively now to protect against false allegations.
Are there any specific examples you can share?
Oh, yes, absolutely. So, like, take the Johnny Depp case, right? It was absolutely groundbreaking because it showed that men could actually stand up and defend themselves against false accusations. And what's really, really significant is that it's not just about celebrity cases anymore. We're seeing this ripple effect throughout the entire legal system, where due process is it's becoming absolutely essential again.
So after everything we've discussed today, I'm really curious about where do you think we go from here?
You know what? I think we're at this really, really crucial turning point right now. Like, we absolutely need to acknowledge that the original goals of feminism were incredibly important, right? Equal rights, equal opportunities. These are things that we should all support.
And how do we balance that with preventing the kind of extremism we talked about?
So I think the key is really about finding this middle ground, right? Like, we need to create spaces where we can have these honest conversations without, and this is really important, without immediately jumping to accusations or cancellations. And what's really fascinating is that we're actually starting to see this happening in some communities.
What makes you optimistic about the future?
The thing that really, really gives me hope is that more people are starting to understand that equality isn't about tearing anyone down, right? It's about lifting everyone up. And what we're seeing now is this growing recognition that men and women actually need to work together to create positive change. Like, we're finally moving past this adversarial approach, and it's absolutely crucial for real progress.
That's really powerful stuff. Thank you so much for sharing your insights with us today on Disruptarian Radio.
Thank you. And I just want to say one final thing. The future of gender relations isn't about winning or losing. It's about finding that balance where everyone can thrive, and that's what we should all be working towards, right?
Thank you once again for tuning in to Disruptarian Radio. We are rebuilding from the rubble of censorship and shadow banning over the last 10 years. We still notice that the promise of Meta to dismiss fact-checkers has not been honored. and our meta outlets on both Facebook and Instagram are getting fact-checked, aka censored. So we will continue on, but we expect slow growth. Your participation is invaluable, and we want to send you our love for your support.